Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Groovy podcast, wherever you happen to be around the world. My name is Ken Kousen. I'm podcasting this time from my home in Marlborough, Connecticut. So that's Eastern Standard Time, but I'm joined by two others this time. Our old friend, Sergio. So feel free to say hi, Sergio.
Hi everyone.
And
Podcasting from Madrid, Spain.
same as usual?
Yeah, same as usual. I just say Madrid because I am actually podcasting from Guadalajara.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's 60 kilometers away from Madrid, so I think I can use the license.
Okay. And we are also joined by our old friend who has not been on the podcast in I don't know how long, and
Long time.
I guess you'd say former head of the Groovy project, but still heavily involved, right? Or how would you say it?
No, yeah, well, I'm part of I'm a member of the PMC, the Project Management Committee, but there's not really a lead or head anymore in the Apache Software Foundation. That's not really a concept. It's more consensus-based. But really, that's Paul's role in to really lead the project. But yeah, I'm much less involved than I used to be. So until following
for those who didn't get that, that's Guillaume Laforge. Don't
co-founder of
Groovy, right?
Co-founder of Groovy in 2003. So soon to be 20 years.
Isn't that amazing?
That's crazy.
I mean, 20 years.
Oh, it is.
That's incredible. Well, you are podcasting from, where are you these days?
So I'm in Paris, France. Always the same place.
How long have you, I know you moved to Google a couple of years ago. How long has that been now?
Oh, that's been longer than this. I've joined Google slightly more than 5 years ago. So
5 years already?
Yeah. Time flies. Yeah.
Have you had any success in bringing Groovy into Google at all?
No, it's, I mean, there are a few, blessed languages, but bringing new languages is not an easy task. And it's not something a one-man show can do.
Well, what role do you play there? I know it's cloud related, but I don't know the details.
Yeah, so I'm a developer advocate for Google Cloud, and I'm focusing mainly on the serverless products. So things like the venerable App Engine product, as well as Cloud Run for running containers serverlessly, Cloud Functions for functions as a service. I'm also focusing a bit these days on the eventing or orchestration related products, like Google Cloud Workflows, to create workflows to orchestrate microservices, APIs, etc. Event Arc, which is another eventing product to relay events coming from the clouds from various sources to various syncs here and there. So that's really the area I'm focusing on. Yeah.
Do you get to participate in the Groovy project much anymore? I mean, you're still part of the committee.
Yeah. So the thing I'm playing with for the past few months, on and off, but along with Leonard from the Spock project, a new version of the Groovy Web Console. So it's implemented differently, but you'll be able to choose between different versions of Groovy, and the UI is newer. There are a few new things compared to the old console that we might say wave goodbye to at some point and move to this new version. And we had a few discussions with Paul about the idea of perhaps trying to find some ways to also integrate that into the Groovy website, or perhaps even the documentation. So imagine you would have, there are many languages, project pages for languages where they have a kind of, online sandbox or console, or, the Go language has this. I think Kotlin has this as well. Try Kotlin.org. So things like this. So seeing if we could integrate that more closely with the Groovy project and the documentation, so that perhaps having like those little play buttons to play the and hack and change and play with the snippets of code that we share in the documentation. So we're thinking about this. It's not firmed up yet or anything, but it's something that's in the air.
I think
I
that'd be
saw
a
a talk.
wonderful idea. Go ahead, Sergio.
I heard a talk from Guillaume at ApacheConf about the new Groovy console,
Yep.
which was great. I will include a link in the show notes of that. Yeah, that looks really nice.
Thanks.
I typically run it locally, but I normally don't use the web. But from what you shown, a lot of people use the web. So
yeah, it's funny.
I think it will be very well received.
Well,
yeah,
even
sharing
as
snippets with friends and so on.
And as a way to integrate in documentation, I mean, that's always appreciated. Just being able to click a button and see parts that you have not played with very much. Although I got to say that if you had your over under that Kotlin would be mentioned in the first 5 minutes of the podcast, I would have lost on that.
And that's my fault.
That was really fast. Yeah, and that I would not have expected that either. That surprised me. But yes, that's definitely a model to choose when you're looking at how they incorporate the functionality in the online docs and everything, and have a console embedded on the homepage so people get to play around and stuff. I think that would be very favorable if somebody could pull that off. Sergio, what are you working on these days, by the way?
So I am now a developer advocate for what we call here the acronym 2GM, which stands for Groovy, Grails, and Micronaut. So I am working like, I don't know, like it's not like regular, but more or less like 3/4 of my time I'm doing developer advocacy kind of stuff, and 1/4 of my time I'm doing like open source development, and that may change from week to week. But I am essentially, we are launching several things around Micronaut. We launch a podcast to compete with the Groovy podcast. We launch a Micronaut podcast, which we are doing every 2 weeks, micronautpodcast.com. Essentially, we are talking about the framework, as you may imagine by the name. That's one thing. We have, we are experimenting with Twitch. We are like doing a live stream Tuesdays and Thursdays in twitch.tv/micronautfwview, where I am writing an application from scratch. So 100% live. So it's essentially 2 hours a week. We are already, we are uploading the videos on demand to YouTube as well. So that's another thing that we did. We have already, so they are not, I think I have 4 to upload. But we will have like 17, so it's 17 hours. So the app now has some legs. I am writing an application to a newsletter application. So an application where you will essentially like someone will register to your newsletter, and we send them an email with a verification code, and they click the email, and we check that the token is not expired. And if it's not expired, we basically, in persistence, we basically like kind of verify that user. We have an endpoint like to send emails to all the newsletter subscribers. We have an endpoint to unsubscribe. And we are using, this is like, I wanted to have, the goal of this thing that we are calling Micronaut Live is, I wanted to have an application which is more than a hello world, because sometimes a hello world is like, I don't know, sometimes I feel like we all in framework development, we are like, sometimes there's like a race for speed, but the examples are really not like real world examples. So this application, I think it has more a kind of a real world scenario where we have like, we are using PostgreSQL. We are using the database migration with Flyway, which if you have not used it is similar to Leaky Base, but kind of not using XML. We have security as well. We are using an external authentication provider. We are using Amazon Cognito, but we could be using like Okta or something like that. We are using a transactional email provider to send the emails. So we are using SendGrid, but you could plug something like a simple email service or Gmail if you wanted to. we are using views. So we have this module in Micronaut, which is you can have template rendering engines. And I hope that when GSPs get decoupled from Grails, we can have GSPs there as well, because that's something that I am really missing. So I am using, in this example, I am using Thymeleaf, and I don't know why, but Thymeleaf really doesn't click with the way I think. I am kind of more used to the velocity way of writing templates, where you have like more like if statements and things like that. And in Thymeleaf, you are like working all the time with attributes in your HTML tags. And for whatever reason, that's really, so I bought a Thymeleaf book that I have here to see if I am able to improve. But since many people are using Thymeleaf, I wanted to use something that people are using. So we are using that. And that's also like discovering things like Thymeleaf is not really prepared for using with GraalVM native images because it uses a ton of reflection to render the HTML. So yeah, as you see, many technologies that people may have in their applications. And we are coding it there every Tuesday and Thursday. So that's one thing that keeps me busy. And the other thing that we keep doing is we keep doing Micronaut guides. Lately, I have been working on a lot in this new module that we announced yesterday in the AOT module. When I say working, it's kind of understanding what the module does and try to explain people and show what it does. And we are like trying to also integrate it with security, and that's kind of an exciting module that we have. And I am working also in Micronaut email, which is kind of a new module that I want to release for the next minor version of Micronaut. The idea there will be that you should be able to inject like a bin of type email sender, and then via configuration, you will use whatever transactional email provider you want to use, SendGrid, Postmark, Simple Email Service. And if you have used the Grails mail plugin, similar to that, but instead of using like typical SMTP, you will use like a real transactional email service provider. So yeah, a lot of Micronaut, a little bit of Grails I've been doing also as well. We sometimes do support tickets, so that's something that we do. I'm trying to help Punit with some of the, I mean, Punit is doing all the work in Grails, to be honest, and just like trying to help with some blog posts about the release and things like that. But Punit is the one that is doing the heavy lifting there.
Well, I got to say, you've mentioned about between 6 and 10 different topics that we wanted to talk about anyway. So let me just mention a couple things there for the listeners. First of all, the show notes for this episode are in the normal place. So it's a GitHub repository, github.com/groovy-podcast/Groovy Podcast, all one word. And the show notes, we are technically at episode 85 now. So season 5, episode 5, whatever that means. Who knows? Maybe next year we will hit 100. Maybe that we won't hit 100 until 2030. Who knows? We'll see how that goes. But one of the things you mentioned were all those different Micronaut features. And in the show notes, we do have a link to the Micronaut YouTube channel for all those Twitch broadcasts. We actually have a link to the Micronaut podcast too. It's might as well be friendly. In addition to, we have links to the last 3 specifically, the podcast, the one on the schema migration tools, Flyway and Liquibase, and on Micronaut data and on Spring AOT. And we have a link to the Micronaut Twitch channel. Now we'll get to the AOT stuff as well, because that's particularly interesting that came out recently. But we'll get back to that in a moment. So at any rate, all those links are available always on the show notes inside there. Now, a couple other things to want to mention before we get back to the details of Micronaut. First of all, the current releases going on. Grails recently released 5.1, I believe, which was not a huge change to anything, mostly bug fixes, and from what I understand, working better with Grails 7.2. Gradle is now, I think they've moved to 7.3 now, 7.3.2 specifically, but again, not a huge change. Just Gradle is on a relatively fast release schedule. That's all. So I don't think they changed anything fundamentally, although I think Grails 7.3 is the first one that officially supported Java 17. I ran a Java 17 build with Grails 7.2 and didn't have any problems, but I may have not used Java 17 to power Gradle. That I'm not sure. I don't remember whether I did that or not. Now that 7.3 is out, yeah, I power that with Java 17 as well. So at any rate, Grails 5.1 is released. Not a lot of changes there. We could talk about that a bit more. The other thing, the other big release, not a big release, but Paul King, who was on the podcast a little bit of time ago, was talking about the new features of Groovy 4, and Groovy 4 now has a release candidate out. And what's the plan for that one, Guillaume? You mentioned Groovy 4 there may not be several release candidates before they do a final.
Yeah, so Paul was wondering if anyone had anything to add for an RC2, a second release candidate. But I think once this second release candidate will be out, I think we'll move to the the final 4.0 release, the official release. So it's looking good, in good shape. You wanted to cover things that are in this release, or?
Well, we kind of did that on a previous one,
Okay,
and when it comes out officially, then we'll do it all again. You know, when 4.0 is released and final. I know that the big thing that a lot of people are focusing on is, and I'm not sure how you pronounce it, GINQ, GINQ.
Yeah, I've been wondering how to pronounce it. Should it be like
I got
GINQ
nothing.
or
I mean,
GINQ?
GI.
You know, it's like GIF and GIF.
Well, which one do you say, by the way? Do you say GIF or GIF?
Let me think about it. GIF, GIF. No, I think I say GIF.
I mean, it's giraffe with a GI, but it's giant with a GI, but it's also anyway, there's lots of counterexamples as well. And the creator, I believe, pronounced it GIF, but again, who knows? You know, wars have been fought over.
I'd go with GINQ then.
Yeah, so it'd be GINQ. I don't, you know. The point is that it's a groovy version of Link, basically. From what I understand, it's a very elegant way of not just searching database data, but you can actually search through JSON data that way. You can do selects on JSON data and find details inside there. Oh, and speaking of funny pronunciation,
like syntax.
Yeah, speaking of funny pronunciation, I call it JSON, not JSON, because I like picturing a guy with a hockey mask and a machete while I'm working on that stuff. I mean, where's the joke otherwise, right? So anyway, I usually will go with the humor no matter what in any of those. At any rate, that's a big feature of Groovy 4. There are many other features of Groovy 4, and we will come back to those when 4 is released sometime. I would guess in the first quarter of next year, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Through the normal Apache process, now that it's an Apache project, they have a much more elaborate formal release mechanism you have to go through. And we'll get to all that. Now, Micronaut, of course, is on, there was a blog post about 3.2 coming out, and I think we're on 3.2.3 at the moment. Is that right, Sergio?
3.23, yeah, I think is the latest. We are working. So the way we work is like more or less a patch every 10 days and a minor every 6 weeks, more or less. It's not like we don't have like a hard schedule. So if we have a patch, we release it. But typically that's more or less what we aim for.
Well, let's go right to the major one that everybody was talking about the other day, which was the Cedric, our good friend Cedric Champeau, posted a nice blog post about Micronaut AOT, the ahead of time compiler, which it's interesting how the post was set up. He was very good about not bearing the lead. The lead, of course, was that by using this AOT module inside of Micronaut, you could use the Graal native compiler mechanism to get the startup time down to, you want to say it? I mean, I could bring it up if you like, but you know what, it was very dramatic. Go ahead.
No, so in the post, he was showing like 7 milliseconds.
7 milliseconds for a startup. This is like, it was
That's crazy.
blisteringly fast. I mean, they were doing, so it was not a massively complex app, but it improved by like 2 orders of magnitude.
Yeah,
It
I tried yesterday in Micronaut Live in the application that I was mentioning before that has more code and more things, and it's doing like Flyway on the startup, and it was down to 94 milliseconds for GraalVM native images.
Now, I gotta acknowledge, first of all, because of course the Spring people bring this up all the time, is that it's not, on most RESTful web services, or certainly websites, it's not the startup time that's the issue. Most websites are willing to take longer to start up as long as it serves individual requests very, very quickly. However, if you're moving to function as a service, if you're doing something that's stateless and just taking in inputs and responding very quickly as you do on Google App Engine or on the cloud providers, then of course startup time is everything there. So to know that Micronaut is just blisteringly fast that way is amazing.
Yeah, so this thing will help in both GraalVM native image scenarios, but also in JIT mode. So we support, I added the AOT module yesterday to this sample application, and I was getting in this sample application without optimizations, I was getting 1.5 seconds startup time in JIT mode, and in GraalVM I was getting 230 milliseconds. For when I added the Micronaut AOT, I got like 26% improvement in JIT, so that will be 1 second and 100 milliseconds. And in GraalVM, I was getting 94 milliseconds. So that in native image was like 60% almost improvement. So there are a couple of things. So one thing is a startup, and then the other thing is time to serve the first request. So we are working on improving that as well. So it depends of what you are using Micronaut, but some modules will need to do more configuration when the first request comes in. For example, security. So you are using security, you are using something that I am using in this sample application. We have to do like, we have to fetch the security configuration from a remote server. Or if you are using one of these solutions for, what is the GCP solution? Help me out. Is Google Secret Manager?
Secret Manager, yes.
So exactly, if you have like your database password, instead of having as an environment variable, you are saving it in a secret manager. And on a startup time, you want to fetch it to configure the application. That's another area which we are not there yet, but I think at least I hope, and I think we will get there soon. We can help in those scenarios. So all of those things that you do on a startup time and time to serve the first quest, I think we can heavily optimize. It's important that people understand what we are doing. So some things that Cedric did, I think they are easy to understand. I think they are like also like they have less side effects. If you want, we can discuss a little bit what optimizations are there so that people understand.
I think it's very impressive. And for those who are not sure or don't remember, Cedric, of course, was a major committer at the Grails project, and then left a while ago. I hesitate to say how long because I misjudged how long Guillaume had moved so badly. But he's now at Oracle working presumably with Graham. I mean, Graham Roche, of course, has been there.
Yeah, he's working on the Micronaut Oracle Labs team. So he has been working, I think, for the past 6 months in the Micronaut team there. Yeah, Cedric is helping a lot Micronaut, not just with the Micronaut AOT, but with many things. So he's maintaining the official GraalVM Gradle, I think maybe in plugins. So those are not just for Micronaut, but also for Spring Boot, for example, if you use. He's helping us a lot in general with our build infrastructure. So the internal build that we use for building modules and building documentation and the whole thing. Yeah, it's helping. Essentially, it's like, I was joking with him the other day, it's like the Señor Lobo from Pulp Fiction. We are calling him to solve like problems that we have here and there. So that's essentially, yeah, he's helping us a lot. And Micronaut AOT is, I think it it plays some buttons on him because it ties heavily into build, which is his cup of tea. So it's like, I think he's really excited about it, and so do I.
As I recall, his blog post, I really should look at it before I say this, but as I recall, I could get the blog post when he presented the build. Of course, I think he used the
Kotlin DSL, yeah.
He did. He used the Kotlin DSL inside his file, which inevitable. And of course, that would have been highly controversial if he was still at Gradle, but you know how it is. So it's really interesting, the work that's going on, shockingly, at Oracle of all places, that seems to be actually helping the Groovy community in several different ways. By the way, when you mentioned that you build this sample app, and this sample app that you're using is the app that's driving the Micronaut podcast, or is it the Twitch channel or whichever like that, kind of reminds me, I'm sure you remember I'm sure Guillaume remembers at the first 2GX conference, the first Groovy and Grails experience there. Graham was doing the keynote, and he got up there and said, as I recall, he was stuck in a layover in Heathrow. And during that layover, it was a delay. He realized that the Grails website was not implemented in Grails. So he took the time during the layover to rewrite the whole Grails website using Grails itself. And the message, of course, he was trying to communicate was, look how powerful this is and look how easy this is. Whereas, I don't know about you, but the message I heard was, wow, Graham's really good. He's a really good developer. But it's nice that, I mean, Sergio, you say you're basically doing the same thing. That was with the Micronaut podcast website, right? That you were discussing?
So the Micronaut podcast, the web, so we are building the Micronaut podcast, the website, the HTML of the website, the RSS feed. So if you know how podcasts work, the podcast is just an XML file,
right.
Which is an RSS feed 2.0 with some extra tags. We are essentially, so we are using Groovy with Gradle. So we have a lot of Groovy code with Gradle, not a lot, but some. And we are generating using Markdown. So we have the episode notes for us are Markdown files. And we essentially...
What was the app you were discussing earlier that you set up? Is that the Twitch channel?
That's the app that we are developing in Micronaut Live. That's a Micronaut application, which we are developing and that we used also for. So I am using that application to like test all of these Micronaut AOT or other improvements that we are like presenting, because that's like an application with more code. The Grails website, for example, is built with Groovy as well. So we are using Groovy in many places. And the Micronaut guides, they use Groovy a lot as well.
And you were talking about using Timeleaf. And of course, the Spring people use Timeleaf a lot. Yeah. But the Spring people, if you look in the Spring Boot initializer, of course, one of the options there is to use Groovy templates. So maybe that might be something you might want to consider at some point. Any rate, there's one other big topic that we want to just address quickly, just to make sure we've mentioned it. And that was the whole issue of the Log4j2 vulnerability, the I guess you call it a CVE, right? Or an RC, remote code execution. I forget what CVE stands for as well. But the
critical vulnerability something,
yeah, critical vulnerability, yeah, whatever it was. And of course, they came out with one that was a Jindy string, which, man, I'm thinking the last time I used Jindy, I just used to refer to Jindy as the bane of my existence. You know, Java naming and directory. I never got those strings right, ever, the first time. You know, in fact, Spring's dependency injection was worth it just to get rid of Jindy, you know, inside Java EE applications. I mean, I wonder how many developers under the age of, say, 35 even recognize what JNDI is, you know, anymore at this point. But yeah, that was the vulnerability. And then of course that got patched very quickly. And then another vulnerability came out, and then that got patched, and then another vulnerability. As of the current status, I think we're up to Log4j2 is at 1.3 the 2.17.0, something like that.
2017, I believe, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and of
Yeah.
course they'll come out with more. It's more a question of, it's not a question of the open source community coming up with a patch. That happens very quickly. It's more a question of major companies recognizing the vulnerability and updating, and a lot of FUD going around and everything. I mean, I was mentioning to you earlier, I had a problem in one of my training classes this week where we were building a Spring app, and somebody noticed, of course, that log4j was in the class path. And I said, look, just because it's in the class path doesn't mean you're vulnerable. You're not actually using it unless you actually disable logback, etc. Any rate, there was a blog post about Grails and the log4j2 vulnerability, which basically says, yeah, it's not a problem, basically. But I imagine the two of you have had some experiences with all that this week too.
Yeah, on my side, it was fun because, well, fun in a way, because at Google, everybody got the message that, hey, if you have some running code reachable from the internet, please be sure that you're not using log4j. So I had to go through dozens and dozens of projects of mine. But fortunately, it's Micronaut or just some Groovy based stuff, etc. So I wasn't vulnerable at all. But it was a bit of work to go through everything and finding where all the sources of my projects were and things like that. But I wasn't too worried because I knew. And it's funny because my impression is that these days with cloud-based projects, often you're back to actually using system out println statements instead of using logging, because you know that those things are going to get caught and logged by the platform's own logging system. So you don't really worry too much anymore about properly configuring logging, journaling for the logs and rotations and things like that. So, I just, I had some log4j libraries around, but not used.
It's just another injection attack, right? It's the old XKCD cartoon with the little Bobby tables and everything. So in fact, they were calling this little Bobby Jindy in this case or something like that. And, so at any rate, how did Sergio, did you have to deal with it as well? I'm sure you did.
Yeah, so if anyone hasn't heard about this, which is difficult to believe by now, but if you haven't, and I have been reading a lot and watching a lot of materials, Sonatype, the custodians of Maven Central, they had a webinar a couple of days ago. So if you go to sonatype, I think it's org or com, forgive me, and you search for resources webinars, you will find like one, which is great. So essentially they explain what they are seeing, because they are seeing like people pulling new versions of log4j. They explain with a demo where you see like the how is the attack happening, how easy it is to actually be vulnerable to, and they like recommend what to do and etc. So we on the Micronaut end and on Grails, so Grails 3, 4, 5, and Micronaut was using logback.
Right.
So this is less. So we're lucky for us. This one we dodged the bullet and didn't affect us that much. Nonetheless, we were like using. We updated the Elasticsearch module, which was using. It was not using log4j core, which was the affected one, but it was using log4j API, but just to essentially. Convey the message for people that they were fine. We updated to the latest version because they released a patch version themselves. And we had also the option in Micronaut Launch, which is this website where you can generate new Micronaut applications, to essentially change from using logback to using log4j. And we had to update essentially the templates for using like 2.15 to 16 to 17. So the new Micronaut release is like update that website with patch configurations, and pretty much the same for Grails. So we have blog posts explaining people how to see if they are vulnerable, how to look for the dependency, and how to force it. So essentially, if you are using Gradle, Cedric published, for example, a tweet, I think was, where he essentially showed how to like do that in a Gradle build, which uses the Gradle way of using bombs to essentially force a version of log4j. which you are getting in the transitive graph. And so yeah, if you are using, check it out, check if you are vulnerable and patch if you are. For us, we were a bit lucky this time, I guess. It essentially, I think it saw a couple of things. One is that for me, it showed that the way open source sometimes is being maintained is not really healthy. And you can think that Log4j is like, I don't know, maybe Log4j and Logback, they are like 80% of the Java projects use any of those. And I don't know how those projects are funded, but I guess they are probably funded in free time of people.
Right. I think the statement is that Log4j was being maintained by 3 developers part-time in their own time. And, you know, therefore be nice to those people. I mean, there was a comment on Twitter about, well, maybe we should be funding some of that open source development. And then somebody pointed out that the amount of funding it would take to compete with a regular day job is very unusual to come by in the open source world. It would actually much more likely what you would need is some company to provide the backing behind it, much like OCI does, sponsoring people to work on Grails or Micronaut or even Groovy, something like that. And that seems very unlikely. So I don't know what the answer is on all that, other than don't be hostile to your poor open source developers. You know, they're doing the best they can, obviously. Ruin their weekend anyway.
Yeah, it's a really, really difficult thing, because I agree with you. I don't think so. I like this trend of GitHub sponsors and Patreon and all those things. I think that's are fine. But as you say, if Marco, for example, who is maintaining SDK Man, maintain SDK Man for the things he's getting for Patreon, he will not do that. No, so thanks God he's doing that. But
that's a chronically underfunded project, in my opinion. I think because Marco he's very typical of the Groovy community. He's much too humble to go out and ask for the amount of funding that he really deserves and should be getting for the amount of work they're putting in. And I mean, I'm part of at least that's part of Open Collective, you know, that you can actually do some sponsorships that way, but you wonder whether Patreon's going to matter, whether some of the GitHub sponsors, as you mentioned. At any rate, go ahead.
So yeah, not an easy solution. Another thing that this thing highlighted for me is, I think this. So I don't know if we are going to have to start sanitizing the logs before logging them, because this thing remind me, as you said, to a SQL injection attack completely.
Yeah.
So I mean, I understand that people don't sanitize logs because you want to see what actually. I mean, you want to log it to understand why your application is not behaving or whatever. But I think, I think people are going to start looking for these kind of things. So anything
injection attacks are all about not taking input from outsiders and automatically rendering it. You know, I mean, it's the same thing with cross-site scripting and everything. I was just really surprised that anybody just accepts input from outside, like a Jindy string, no less, and saying, oh, sure, we'll execute this. I mean, haven't we learned anything from the JavaScript world? So, I mean, I don't know. I guess I just was lucky that I wasn't directly affected, other than, you know, because I do a lot more of the teaching and the stuff than maintaining legacy apps there. Speaking of Spring, however, let me use that as a bit of a segue. One of the interesting features of Spring that has had a lot of attention over the past few years has been the mechanism to do reactive services, to using the reactive streams specification that's implemented by both Java libraries and JavaScript libraries, things like RxJava, Akka streams, several others. Of course, one of the dominant ones and the library that's used by far the most in Spring applications for reactive is called Project Reactor, or sometimes just referred to as Reactor. And one of the co-founders of Reactor was also quite involved in the Groovy and Grails worlds several years ago. And I'm referring to, now, Guillaume, please correct my pronunciation if I get it wrong. How do you, is this Stéphane Maldini? How do you say it?
Yeah, Stéphane Maldini.
Stéphane, is that how you say it? Even with the little accent?
Yeah.
I want to make sure I get that. Just Stéphane, even though the E on the end, it's still pronounced Stéphane.
Yeah, Stéphane. Yeah.
Okay, so the sad thing about, I mean, Stéphane was universally seemed to be liked and admired as a developer, and tragically passed away a few weeks ago. In fact, it was a tweet that I saw by Cedric Champeau that pointed out he had just found out about this and was just really shocked that he was no longer with us. And I remember, Guillaume, you also posted that you knew him well, and
Yeah.
when I talked to Sergio, neither of us knew him personally. I mean, we knew who he was. Clearly, he had that kind of impact on the field, but you knew him personally. What can you tell us about him? How should we remember Stéphane?
Yeah, so Stéphane was a very sensitive person, and a very bright engineer and developer. And I think I met him in 2009 or so. So I've known him for a really long time now. So also because he's French, so when I was meeting him at conferences here and there, the French mafia, the French connection was always, hanging together. So I had the chance of spending some real great quality time with him, and to get to know him. So yeah, initially he started contributing to the Grails ecosystem through a few Grails plugins. He wrote with a team of other people. He wrote an application for Scrum and Agile teams that was using JSF and Grails. And I think his first plugin was a JSF plugin for Grails. And then he soon added some reactive, I think back in the day that was probably using RX Java, which was the pioneer for reactive libraries in the Java ecosystem. But soon after that, so he also participated at least one of our internal Groovy conferences, the Groovy developer conferences that we hold once in a while between the Groovy core developers to talk about the roadmap, etc. He participated to one of these. He did, so soon after that, he co-founded Project Reactor along with John Brisbane when he was at Pivotal. And he participated in the reactive stream definitions, the specification, and the libraries, the APIs that underpins RX Java, Project Reactor, etc.
And even Java 9 has the interfaces in it.
Yeah, exactly, and integrated in Java 9. So it's rare that someone external is able to contribute to something that's now internal into Java. That's really quite an achievement, I would say. Yeah, reactive programming, those APIs. What else? He joined Netflix a year or two ago. So the next time you watch some series or movie on Netflix, you can think about him, because thanks to him, the Java heavyweight stuff going on at Netflix is there and running and flawlessly, also thanks to him, among many other great engineers. But yeah, you can thank him for that as well. So I'm very sad, because I've known him for a long time. He was really a very, very nice person. And I used to like meeting him when we were at Spring 1-2GX conferences, or Google Cloud Next. He came there, or our Groovy Dev conferences, GreatConf, and more locally, for me at least, DevOps France. We did a talk together. So I have several pictures of him and me in different places in the world, in the US, different towns, Dallas, Washington, San Francisco, London, and Copenhagen for GreatConf. And I will really, really miss him. And he was really a lovely person, really lovely person. it's
Well,
gonna
thank
be
you very
missed.
much. And I'm sorry for your loss, for all of us, actually. I wish I'd gotten a chance to know him better. I mean, over the past couple of years, we've all been so isolated from each other. It's been difficult to keep in touch like that.
Yeah.
In the show notes, just to give people a basic introduction, because I didn't find an actual obituary written anywhere. We did add in links to his account on Twitter, which was not terribly active, but it was there, and his account on GitHub, and the announcement of when he became the Reactor project lead, and his bio on various sites like Crunchbase or Spring One, or of course the No Fluff Just Stuff conference tour. Also, a couple of his presentations, one on the value of reactive design, pardon me, and the announcement of Reactor 3, which was the incorporation of the Java 8 features and Spring. And of course, that's the one that became the basis of the WebFlux module inside of the Spring framework. There's also a link there to a family fund, basically, I think it was a Kickstarter fund there.
It's GoFundMe.
Oh, it's a GoFundMe,
yeah.
right? But that one is now closed, but they do have some basic information, and you can get a sense of how beloved he was by how quickly that raised far more money than they were expecting, just to help bring him home, back to France and everything, from presumably from California, where he was.
Yeah.
So for everyone who's was not aware of him, that it's good to know about him. If you are aware of him, we're sorry for your loss. Please feel free to say something publicly or comment or whatever, and we will, if you want to express some reminiscences on a future podcast, just let us know. So thank you for that. And I'm glad we had at least a chance to mention it there. Now, I don't really have anything else major on the show notes there. I do have one somewhat embarrassing story, I suppose. It's about Guillaume. It's not embarrassing for you. It's more embarrassing for me.
Okay.
Yeah, it turned out, those who are listening to this podcast, if you didn't know before, you know now that Guillaume has an outrageous French accent, wonderful French accent. And the first time I gave a talk at one of those 2GX conferences, at the end of the talk, both Guillaume and Cedric came up and said hi, and I could not resist asking you at the time to just say one time to me, your mother was a hamster and your father smelt of elderberries. And I remember both of you just stared at me like you had no idea what I was talking about. I mean, I was just doing the Monty Python bit, and of course, you knew the movie in French, so you had no idea what I was talking about there. And I always wanted to follow up and say, did you, like, the two of you walk away and just go, what in the world was he talking? What was that all about? At any rate, that's what that was. It was an attempt at a gag that never quite worked. But, I mean, of course, Sergio's Spanish accent, everything in Spanish sounds like you're singing anyway. So that always is fun. But the French accent, all I can think of is the Monty Python, the Holy Grail movie. So anyway.
And Holy Grails,
Oh, hey, well, like I say, my teaching app for whenever I taught Grails was the quest for the Holy Grails, and we'd have knights and castles and tasks, and
Nice.
answer the bridge keeper and all things like that. Okay, was there anything else that either of you wanted to mention, or that I didn't give enough time to, or anything else that you're thinking about?
No, nothing.
No.
Because if you do think of something, we might actually have to have another podcast at some point. How about that?
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm glad you were both available. I hope you both have a nice holiday season, even if we are still in the depths of this pandemic with the Omicron variation going on. But we'll see how things develop, and I hope you have a nice holiday. Thank you very much for being here.
Yeah. Thanks for inviting us, Ken. Happy holidays to everyone, and stay safe, because things are getting complicated by the date. So.
Isn't it just the way? But I'm glad we're still able to do this, and it's really good to be able to keep in touch with people now. I guess if that's the lesson we want to draw from from Stéphane is to make sure you stay in touch with the people that you value, and
Yeah.
make sure you let them know that even if they give you a hard time, Sergio, you know, it's a good thing. It's all done in fun, and we're glad to have you there. And I really do have to watch one of those Twitch streams at some point, as long as it doesn't start throwing in commercials like it does on other Twitch streams like that.
I don't. That's not under my control. But
Yeah, I was afraid of
that's more under my control. That's probably you have to ask Twitch.
Yeah, well,
but yeah, happy to see you there. And if not, it's on demand in YouTube.
Well,
yeah,
I'll throw in some jokes, and I suppose I should finish. I do have one gag that I picked up recently, which was, of course, that it's harder for me to do my jokes over these Zoom calls because they're not remotely funny. Okay, at any rate, I want to thank again the No Fluff.
Close on a high note.
Yeah, so to speak. I want to thank the No Fluff Just Stuff Tour again for hosting a page for the Groovy podcast. You can get this where all good podcasts are downloaded. And of course, don't forget the Open Collective, Friends of Apache Groovy, and again, sponsor SDK Man if you could possibly do that. And maybe someday, although that day will never come, there'll be another Groovy Calamari. I don't know.
Someday when I finish the newsletter application.
Yeah, someday. Yeah, we'll see how that goes. Okay, take care, guys. Good to see you again.
Yeah, happy
Thank
holidays.
you.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye bye, everyone. Happy holidays.